Well, thank you all for coming to our first undergrad Q&A panel about undergrad research here at Notre Dame. As you know, I'm your TA, Lindsey Turnbull, and I'm going to have the panelists here introduce themselves. They're all undergraduates who have spent a significant amount of time doing research here, and they're really here to answer your questions. So I've got questions here that we can ask, but ultimately this is about you and about getting the most out of your experience and what you want to know, not about what any of us think you should know. So ask the questions that you're interested in, and they'll do the best to give you an answer that will help you in the future. So we'll start with Charles here. Just introduce yourself, say a little bit about the lab you're in, what your research is, and what you're planning on doing after graduation.
So hi, my name is Charles. I am a senior environmental sciences major. I started out doing research in Dr. David Lodge's lab on environmental DNA of wetland fish, and now I work in the lab of Dr. Fader doing speciation research in apple maggot flies. I am planning to go to graduate school. Probably will end up at McGill in Montreal doing evolutionary ecology.
Hi, I'm Riley Parrott. I'm a junior PLS and environmental science major. I've worked with Professor Hellman looking at climate change and how that affects certain species of butterflies. Also this summer I spent doing research on small mammals at Undergraduate.
Hi everyone, I'm Rachel Cotton. I'm a senior biology major and I've worked for Marianne McDowell since fall of my freshman year. I study the immunobiology of leishmania infection and lymphatic filariasis. Generally, I've spent a summer at WashU St. Louis and 2 summers at the NIH, and I'm planning on pursuing a PhD in immunology after graduation.
I'm Roger Smith, senior biology major. I've been working in the FERDIG lab, studying the transcriptional response of malaria parasites to different drug perturbations and looking at what we can learn from that about drug mechanism of action. I began in that lab spring of freshman year. Since then, I have studied abroad and I worked last summer in New York City at Memorial Sloan Kettering. And I plan to pursue an MD PhD after Notre Dame.
Hi guys, my name is Kristin. I'm a senior bio major, and since my sophomore year I've been working in Dr. Rebecca Wainert's lab down the hall. And so our lab looks at KD development and regeneration in the zebrafish, and my project in particular is studying a very specific pathway and its potential role in regeneration. And I'm currently in the process of applying to medical school, but I do hope to pursue a research component in my future career.
All right, great. Do any of you have questions to start us off? Things that are burning in your brain? All right, well, why don't you each tell us a little bit about why you chose to work in the lab that you're currently working in or have worked in the past? What made you drawn to that area of research or that particular environment? Go ahead, you can start us off.
So I started out doing research in Dr. David Lodge's lab in the summer before my freshman year. So I'm actually technically a local, and I had no idea what I was going to do the summer after I graduated from high school. I was technically an international student as well, so I couldn't really legally work, and so I was just looking for things to do, and I knew I was going to be a bio major already, or bio ES major, and I sent an email to the first lab that interested me, and that was Dr. David Lodge's lab in the Center for Aquatic Conservation, and I sent the email to the professor, and he forwarded my email to the lab manager, who got back to me a few days afterwards and basically told me that she had just had a conversation with one of the incoming graduate students, and he was looking for an incoming undergrad to work with for the next few years, and so it worked out perfectly. It was a couple days after my graduation that I came to Galvin and started my research career here. And since then, I've moved on to evolutionary ecology, which is where my interests and passions have led me. And how I got involved with Dr. Fader was actually, I was introduced to him by another professor. And this other professor, she works at the Department of Organismic and Evolutionary Biology at Harvard. And I did an internship at the Museum of Comparative Zoology at Harvard the summer after my freshman year. And I loved it. I loved the work, I loved the questions, I loved the research. And she knew the evolutionary biology professor here personally. And so she put me in contact with him. And that's how I switched labs.
I kind of stumbled into my lab. So sophomore year, I took ecology, and the professor was Jessica Hellman, and she talked a lot about her research with butterflies and climate change, and it sounded really interesting. So I talked to her after class one day, and she said, "Yeah, come help out," and I did. So it's really easy to get involved. You don't have to be someone who started out as a high schooler, but there's always that option as well.
Yeah, and when I was in high school, I worked on dendritic cells in IL-12 at the La Jolla Institute for Allergy and Immunology, and I knew that I liked research after that experience. It was exciting to be the first person to know something in the lab, even if it seemed small and insignificant. It meant a lot to me. So when I was looking at colleges, I would always look through the faculty and see who I might be interested in working with. And looking at Notre Dame, I came across Mary Ann McDowell's research, and her webpage at the time talked about dendritic cells in IL-12 and leishmania infection. And I had no idea what leishmania was at the time, but dendritic cells in IL-12, it's something I thought I knew a little bit about. So, and it helped that she looked really friendly and nice in her faculty photo. So I was like, oh, I'll just email her. And so I started in the lab first week of freshman year. Dr. McDowell was the first one to welcome me to Notre Dame, which was really great. And she also was really instrumental in setting me up with the lab where I work at the NIH. She did her postdoc there in the Laboratory of Parasitic Diseases. And so I've gotten to go there for the past 2 summers and pursue mechanisms of immune modulation of a different parasite. But the work that I do here and there are pretty complementary. So there's no one right path to picking a lab. You don't have to be passionate about something right now. So I'd encourage any of you who are interested in getting involved in a lab to just browse through the faculty here in biology and chemistry and biochemistry, the Harper Cancer Research Institute people, and pick the 5 that jump out at you and just drop them a nice email and ask if you can work in their lab for a couple hours a week. You'll probably get at least one reply that says sure or come meet with me. The faculty here really like to take undergrads in their labs. So.
Yeah, coming to Notre Dame, I knew I wanted to get involved in undergraduate research. I wasn't set on any field, like most of you probably are not, just because you don't know that much about it. I was definitely from the start very interested in DNA and things relating to that. But the opportunity really just kind of presented itself in meeting the graduate student who was TA in the Gen Bio lab. And I was speaking with him about the lab he works in and what he does, and he mentioned that there was some seniors in the lab who would be graduating out. So that meant that there would be this need for extra hands in the lab. So I just kind of took hold of that opportunity and started out spring and freshman year just doing 4 or 5 hours a week, purely volunteer basis, just to get a feel for it. But I would encourage you guys to talk to upperclassmen or the graduate students that you meet, in addition to sending emails to professors, just because there is, practically there will be a need for hands in labs as seniors graduate, and so that's a space to fill. Another thing was once I was in the lab for a couple of years, when they were looking for more undergraduates, they turned to me to help find people for the lab. So, like I said, talking to upperclassmen, they may be in labs that are looking for undergraduates. So, in addition to emailing the professors, I think those are good avenues.
So my story is a little bit different because coming to Notre Dame, I didn't know that I wanted to do research. It was interesting, but I think I was a little bit intimidated by it and unsure of how to go about finding a lab, and unsure of what my role would be as an undergrad researcher. But actually, freshman year, I had friends that were starting to join labs, and I remember specifically talking to Rachel in Gen Bio and picking her brain a little bit about what she was doing and how she got involved. So my sophomore year rolled around, and by that point I was like, you know what, I think I want to go for this, and I'm interested, and I'd like to get involved. So I had met my PI at the research networking dinner that they held freshman year, but at that point I didn't really know that I was going to pursue her lab in particular. She was a new faculty member, she had just come from Harvard, and she was setting up her lab. But then sophomore year I kind of did my research on the faculty bios online, as probably many of you will do. And what drew me to her lab in particular was that she used an animal model. I really liked that. And I liked the medical relevance of her work. So I ended up sending a few emails out, and I heard back from Rebecca and another PI, and then sort of interviewed with both. And when I interviewed with Rebecca, what I liked particularly was that she was really interested in personalities and like how people would work together in the lab and like the dynamics. And it turns out that I was a good fit, and I really liked the feel of her lab, and I liked the people. So I ended up choosing to work with her, and it's been a great fit ever since.
So Kristin, what was the highlight so far of your research in that lab? You said it was all about personality and it was a really good fit for you. If you could pick like one instance where you felt like this is really what it's all about.
Can I have two, maybe? As far as like the personal connections go, my mentor was a graduate student who has since graduated, and she's now our lab manager, and we're actually like best friends now. So that's been a great relationship we've sort of built. And it's sort of funny, I think my PI thinks it's hysterical that we like paint each other's nails on the weekend. She's like, how did this happen? Like, you guys, like, she's your mentor. How are you guys like best friends now? But we are. Anyway, it's just a side note. But I think probably like the greatest experience thus far have been like conference experiences that I've had, because it's just an incredible feeling to be presenting your work at like a regional or national, international meeting, and realizing that you're really contributing to the world of research, and to meet all these incredible PIs and to hear about what's going on. It's really, really cool. So I've had the opportunity to, last spring I traveled to the Vatican actually, because there was a International Adult Stem Cell Conference, and so myself and Becky, she's another senior bio major, we both work with zebrafish and regeneration, so that's sort of how we got involved with that. Went there as like student ambassadors, and there were 25 of us from all over the world. And really our goal is just to like learn about the advances in adult stem cell therapies and then kind of bring that information back to campus. So that was an unbelievable experience, and if you guys have further questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them, because I think they'd like to do it again this year and in later years. And then I also was able to present my work in Milwaukee at a regional zebrafish conference, and so that was really cool. Those conference experiences have been awesome.
So how many of our panelists have been to a conference, either national or local? Pretty nice. And how many of you think you might be interested in going to a conference? All right, so that's pretty much everybody. So I guess I'll ask
Yeah,
Charles
so
then.
reiterating what Kristin said, conferences are really, really awesome. The first conference I went to was an international evolution conference in Ottawa, and I got paid by the National Evolutionary Synthesis Center to fly out there from Boston, where I was working that summer, to present a poster on the microdissection work that I've been doing with sperm cell deer mice. But anyways, so besides like, you know, getting to present your research to a professional audience, and like Kristin said, really acknowledging the fact that you're contributing scientific research to the world, but like it's really, really fun too. I remember on the flight over, I had my first legal beer. That was awesome, and it was free. And I also remember at the final like dinner farewell party, there was a techno party, like just literally a techno party inside the Museum of Civilization on the Quebec side in Ottawa. And there were evolutionary biologists around me, like professors, like full-on like 40, 50-year-old professors, like breaking it down. It was really, really interesting to see somebody who, you know, probably like your professor at Gen Bio or something, like a real person, you know, they go to parties, they drink, they do what you do, and they definitely have done what you guys do right now. So specifically, I think the pinnacle was when I was introduced by my PI at Harvard at that time to these two professors who are world famous for working on the Darwin's finches. They're the Grants and the professors at Princeton. And I remember I was talking to Rosemary Grant for like a good 40 minutes with like a wine glass in my hand, standing in the middle of like the giant atrium of the museum with professional biologists all around me, and just talking to her about my research, about her research, about like I was a sophomore at the time, so not very far away from you guys, and I was just like, wow, like, do I really deserve to be standing here talking to you, like taking 40 minutes of your time? But she said, I remember this one phrase she said, I asked her, what do I, like, I'm just really excited, I'm really passionate, like I have no idea what I'm doing, but I know like I'm really interested in this, like I want to learn. And she just responded with, I think you've got it, in like her British accent. And that just like really hit home. It's like, I mean, you guys are freshmen, you know, nobody expects you guys to know what kind of research you want to do for the rest of your life. Like the work that we're doing right now in our labs, they're probably not going to be the kind of research that we're going to pursue for the rest of our lives either. But what you really want to figure out is what you're interested in, what you're passionate about, and that's going to be what's going to drive you into the future.
Yeah, I mean, I have a similar story to yours, Charles, so I won't like elaborate too much because, I mean, you'll see that the scientific community is very small and very welcoming. And for me, it's the parasitology community. I was in Brazil for a meeting last fall. It was the first presidential election where I could vote, and I was in Sao Paulo, Brazil to hear like the announcement of who won the election. And I was with a bunch of scientists in my field, and everyone was, you know, like on the opposite end of the world, but with eyes on the United States. And that was something that I'll always remember as being a part of the scientific community, that parasitology family, like celebrating like a milestone in my life, I guess. But more than that, I mean, what Charles said, getting to be in the same room and have conversations with these people that I idolize, like celebrities. Like Mary Ann's postdoc advisor was David Sachs, was at this parasitology meeting, and I like had turned down an internship with him freshman year, and I always felt so awkward about that. And here I was standing in this resort in Sao Paulo talking about alternatively activated macrophages and Leishmania infection, and like similar to Charles' experience of like, what am I doing here? This can't be real. That was totally the thought I had as well. And it's going back to the small world thing. I mean, you'll run into these people again and again at meetings, and you'll read their papers, they'll review your papers. One of the professors at Stanford who I am talking to about possibly working with him next year, I met him at this meeting in Brazil. And so it was great to say, oh yeah, I'm not sure if you would remember me, but I was there and was really interested in your work, and he responded right away, like, you'd be a great fit for my lab, looking forward to meeting you in interviews. And so making those connections at conferences is really fun too. And it doesn't feel like artificial or networking, like, I don't know, like another experience might. Even as students, we're really welcomed into this scientific community through doing research. And that's something that I think you can only get by joining a lab, and it'll really enrich your Notre Dame experience. And undergraduate research has really defined my experience here and has become another source of like camaraderie and family. I mean, we all are passionate about the same thing, and so that's a common ground that really runs deep. So I'll stop babbling. I'll let you give it.
I would just say I totally agree with what everyone has said here. Lindsey sent us these questions ahead of time, and it's great because we all, I'm sure, thought about these, and so it's really funny that we all have the same answer. But one of the biggest highlights would definitely be going to a conference. I attended and presented a poster at a national conference in Atlanta. So like 3 or 4 people from the lab here were there. Rachel was there, and then the biggest name professors from around the world who work in malaria were there. And Rachel and I had both just turned 21, so we were having beers there with some of the biggest names in malaria research, which is just, again, like very humbling when you're like, wow, how am I talking to this guy whose name is on the end of that list of authors for so many papers that I've read, in Atlanta while my roommates are in class or whatever. And the second thing, to echo what Kristin said, would definitely be the interpersonal relationships in the lab. That's a huge thing, which is something to look for when you are looking for a lab too. If you can get a sense of that, I mean, maybe it doesn't matter as much for undergrad, but I mean, if you're going on to grad school, that's definitely a huge thing. You want to talk to people who are in the lab to get a feel for like what the lab environment is. But that's something that maybe is overlooked sometimes. But you know, today just in lab, we're just hanging out, and there's times where everyone's just sitting around and talking, and it's just fun. It's literally just legitimately fun. So those would be my two highlights for sure.
Riley, did you want to tell us about your highlight?
I guess my highlight has been this past summer. If you guys haven't heard about UNDERC, it's this environmental research center up in the UP that Notre Dame has. And it's 9 weeks. It's both research and class. And you design your own experiments. You go through all the steps of having your own research with a mentor, but without a guiding professor over you. You learn a ton about writing papers, about field work, because it's an ecology-based research center, and just it's great. You get to hang out with a bunch of bio nerds all summer, and yeah, you learn a lot.
And so I actually haven't done the under program, but I've came there a couple times, and it's really, really awesome. And I really wish I had the opportunity to do it. You guys get like a stipend. You guys get like what, six
credits.
Biology credits that you can do over the summer, and so you don't have to pay tuition for those credits either. And what's nice about it is that like there really is a cohort of students that you begin the program with and you end the program with, and you become friends with them afterwards. One of the sad things about like my research experiences with like for all 3 summers I was kind of on my own, and so I made like friends with like other programs who I just happened to be living with, but it did feel a little lonely, like being the only undergrad, just doing your own thing in a lab.
Sometimes being the only undergrad in the lab can be a really fun thing though, because they don't look at you like you're the only like student. They start to treat you like you're like a contributing member of the lab and as a colleague, not just as a student. So if you have the chance to do research like elsewhere for the summer, like definitely take advantage of that, because you don't have limited summers your freshman. You have 3 to go. So try to take advantage of all 3 if you can, and get a broad range of experiences, whether that's here or somewhere else if research is your thing. So, because you'll find that each lab has a slightly different dynamic. I mean, I've worked for like 5 different people now in my career, and every time has been like a slightly different kind of transition or lab dynamic, or like my communication with my bench mentor or my PI like is slightly different when I'm here with Marianne versus at NIH with Tom and Roshnak. So, and figuring out that student-mentor relationship will like mean the difference between having a good experience and really struggling in the lab, I think.
We're going to take some of your questions now. I know you've got questions, so don't be shy.
So, if you don't know if you're definitely interested in doing research, what do you think the best way to go about that is?
So the question is, if you're not sure if you're interested in doing research, what's the best way going about figuring that out and making a decision about how to get into research or whether it's right for you?
So the way I started was, I kind of thought this was something I might be interested in doing, right? And the lab, like in the Fertig lab, they also want to have kind of a trial period where they see if you're good at what you're doing too, before they invest any of their resources in you. Because of course anything you're doing in the lab is spending lab money on those experiments and everything. So my first semester, spring of freshman year, was just 4 or 5 hours a week, doing simple things in the lab, just getting a feel for what it's like to be in a real lab setting, not the hyper-controlled classroom lab setting. So if I didn't like that, then I wouldn't have stuck with it. But I did really like it, and they liked the work I was doing, so then that turned into, I stayed that summer after spring, and I've been in the lab since. So I think just trying it out would be the best thing. If you're just doing it for volunteer, and you're just doing simple projects, I I think most professors would be very open to that, you know, if they have a position.
Yeah, they understand too that if you haven't done research before, there's this like try it, you'll like it, or try it, you won't like it period, kind of like Breck Sports does with their first week of like fitness classes. So I didn't know that I loved research until I did it at Literary Institute, and I think that rings true for a lot of students here who come in and haven't done research before. There's also the students who try it and don't like it, and then leave a lab after a semester or two, and that's like perfectly fine as well. If you don't like something, and it's perfectly fine to go to your faculty member and say, like, this isn't exciting to me, I don't want to waste your time. And like ending on good terms is okay too. But I would encourage everyone here to try research. Notre Dame has tons of resources for you to try it. They encourage the faculty to take undergrads in their labs. So there's no reason not to, in my opinion, especially if you can get a good mentorship experience out of it, or even get a few credits, or yeah, there's no reason not to.
What about Intro to Undergrad Research? Have any of us done that?
What is that?
Yeah, so in the biology department, there is this Introduction to Undergraduate Research class that will be available to you next semester. Dr. Whaley is in charge of it. If you haven't met Dr. Whaley yet, hopefully you will soon. She's our undergraduate research coordinator for the Department of Biological Sciences. And so Intro to Undergrad Research is just that. It gives you an overview of what the undergraduate research experience will be like, and you have a small, mostly independent project where you design experiments. You have some money to order reagents to carry out those experiments, and you're overseen by Dr. Whaley and then possibly by another faculty member in the department also. And you present a poster at the College of Science Joint Annual Meeting in the spring, or COSJAM we call it, and you'll be with like a group of other students too. So if you take Intro to Undergrad Research, IUR, that's something really easy that you can say to a faculty member when you're asking to join their lab. Oh, I took IUR with Dr. Whaley, and they'll know what that means. Sometimes the faculty members who like mentor groups for IUR or for the Cell Bio Research Lab end up taking one or two of those students from the group that they mentored into their lab. So it's a really nice segue if you haven't done research before to go from like being a student in the classroom and taking classroom labs, which are drastically different from any undergraduate research experience will be, to getting to be independent and take intellectual ownership of a project and really think about the science that you're doing and why. And IUR will help build those skills for you. So we're kind of changing the syllabus for next semester, but the purpose will be the same, to kind of bridge that gap between students who don't know if they like research or not, or don't have the skills of the language to like go to a faculty member and articulate why, to then being able to join a lab after taking Intro to Undergrad Research. So does that kind of explain what that is to you guys?
So it's not a bad idea to just talk to people. You know, we're a resource. I'm sure you know other undergrads who have just recently gotten started in research. Their experience will probably reflect what yours will be like if you do decide to start. So I think undergraduate research depends a lot on the particular experience and the particular mentor and the interactions between the undergraduate researcher and the bench mentor. And that can either go really, really well or really, really not well. And for us, I guess, I think it's safe to say it went pretty well. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be sitting here. But just because some people might have a bad experience doesn't mean that they actually dislike undergraduate research. It just could mean that they have, you know, they just didn't have a very good experience for that time. And similarly, for us, I think perhaps we got pretty lucky, and that might not be the case for you. So really talk to the people like us who, you know, really like research and are still doing research, but also definitely talk to the people who have tried research and decided not to continue with it, and ask them why, because those reasons are, I think, equally valid.
To continue on the point of the whole mentor topic, I think that situation is very much comparable to roommates freshman year at Notre Dame, right? So it's completely random, and a lot of times it will be random. Like your PI will be like, well, this person doesn't have an undergrad, and they need some extra hands on their project, and like throw you on board. So I think, I mean, yeah, sometimes you get lucky, like me. Like, I'm best friends with my mentor. But I think a lot of it is how you handle the situation. Same with, like, your roommate. You don't know your roommate, and you may have polar opposite personalities, but so long as you can kind of roll with the punches and work well together, that's really what's important. And obviously your PI is there to help as well, should you get into a situation where you're having a difficult time. I think I have heard situations where students sometimes switch grad mentors.
I can speak to that actually. So my first semester with Marianne, I was like kind of just tossed around from person to person in the lab. And then in the spring, I worked with a graduate student who had come back from a fellowship at another university. And so I worked with her really closely for a semester. And then we both left for the summer. And coming back in the fall, I think there was like a communication breakdown between the two of us, and I was largely unmentored again. And I didn't really know where I stood with this grad student personally or professionally. And that was really frustrating to me. I was afraid to go to her with questions. And I also didn't want to go to Marianne with questions either, because I felt like I was failing somehow, that I couldn't figure out the communication. So I spent an exorbitant amount of time reading and thinking about what I was doing in the lab and why. And like didn't really go to class or study because the research was like my home here at Notre Dame at that point, and that was the most important thing to me. So in hindsight, I probably handled that poorly. Also, my primary form of communication with my PI at that point was through writing. Every couple weeks, I would write up a lab report with like whatever data I had accumulated in that time, and put it in the context of like a pretty like lengthy literature search that like was very time consuming. And I think I like learned most of the immunology that I know through that. But it was a really poor way of saying, hey, here's what I think I'm doing. Am I on the right track? That was not the right way to go about it. So by the end of that semester, I was like really defeated, really exhausted, and frustrated with my progress in the lab because I didn't feel like I had one person to go to ask for help. I had like two half people, if that makes sense. And so when I got back in January, I asked to have like regular weekly meetings with Marianne, and she was really receptive to that. So I had like 1 hour once a week of standing time where I could go to her with questions when I needed help, and that made all the difference. And with the graduate student in the lab, she has since graduated and like we don't keep in touch, but I learned a lot from her technique-wise, and I like really appreciate like the teaching that I've had from her. And I learned a lot about like student-mentor communication. And I have a high school student that I'm mentoring this semester in the lab, and so I hope that like what I learned from that graduate student and Marianne, that I can like not make the same mistakes that I'm mentoring this high school student now. So it's there's definitely a lot of interpersonal skills that go into a student-mentor relationship. There's an element of self-management and management and communication as well. Being able to go to your mentor and like ask, like, what am I doing? Why? Where can I find this in the lab? Like, never be afraid to ask a question if you need to. And if you don't feel like you can ask a question, there's something wrong. So, I guess I don't have like the best advice for how to handle that, but just keep in mind that every like student-mentor relationship will be slightly different, and pay attention to how that relationship is affecting your work. So, but like a poor student-mentor relationship isn't an excuse in my mind for like quitting a lab if you love the science. There's ways to work around that, I think. And if you really do love the science, then you can talk to your PI, you can talk to other students, or switch labs too. Sometimes I look back on that semester and think a sane person would have switched labs. I'm glad that I didn't now, because I really do like what I'm working on. But it's not perfect for everyone. So.
What is a typical time commitment as the labs go?
So the question is, what is the typical time commitment as far as lab work goes?
So you can take a varying amount of credits that you could get for during the academic year, or if you qualify for certain financial aid things, you can get paid if your PI is willing to pay you. So based on that, you have certain obligations. I think kind of the standing rule is for every 1 credit of research, it's about 6 to 8 hours a week. but it seems that you always end up being there longer than you think. It's actually really hard to do much in only 6 to 8 hours a week. You could easily spend that and just maintain, like I spend 6 to 8 hours a week just like kind of maintaining the cultures of parasites that I have to grow. That's probably 4 or 5 hours a week, so you couldn't really do much. I do 2 credits of research, and I have done that most semesters other than fall of sophomore year when I had genetics and Orgo 2 and just didn't want to overcommit. So that's usually about 15 to 20 hours a week. Now but it definitely fluctuates too. There's weeks when you have a lot going on. My work in particular, I have like a lot of ramping up to do to like large culture volumes and get everything highly synchronized, and then I have a crazy week. Like this week is going to be closer to 30 hours. But there's next week is fall break and I'm probably going to do nothing, or I'm going to do nothing. So it definitely fluctuates, but I'd say average is around 15 to 20.
Yeah, and as you progress through the lab too, and gain more independence, you gain more control over your schedule, but you also end up spending more time when you have more control over your schedule, I think. So yeah, my first semester in the lab was probably only a couple hours a week, and then working with that graduate student for the first time, I was there from like 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock every day, like 6 days a week. I learned a lot in that time, but it depends who you're working for, and then once you have some independence, you can kind of make your own hours. So it's not always easier. Sophomore fall, I was in the lab overnight many times, which is not ideal or safe. But it's hard to like manage your lab work and your classwork. Like I can't wait for grad school when I don't have to plan my experiments around going to class or like running off in the middle of the day. I just can't wait to have a whole work day to spend in the lab. And that's why summers are so great, because you don't have to run around from classes and back to lab, and it takes a lot of like self-management and time management and planning to like not be in lab at odd hours once you have larger experiments that are running. So I think like both Roger and I are still working on that. But it depends like what stage you are at your independence, how much work you're willing to do. I'm really frustrated with how slow progress is sometimes in science, and so I just want to get all the data done now, but that means like I'll be up for 3 days. So it's up to you, and anywhere from 5 hours to 30 hours in a week is like typical. So there's no like clear-cut hour limit.
And when you're just starting out, sometimes on a volunteer basis, you really don't have any like specific obligation, and it's really flexible. Whenever you're free, you can come in. If you're super busy for a week, you can just send an email to your bench mentor and say, I have a really packed week, I can't make it this week, and usually they'll be fine with it. So, I mean, at our stages, like, this is pretty much as much as you can possibly do.
Yeah.
So don't be too intimidated.
Yeah, and you won't be like on your own, like cut loose the first semester either. You'll have someone that you can ask questions of on a daily basis and who knows what you're doing, and hopefully you'll become familiar with what they're doing. You'll have like a person in the lab besides your PI to go to. So you'll have that support system there the first semester at least.
There are also friends of ours I know that, I mean, we're here because we do a ton of research, like Charles said, like that we've all decided that that's something we care a lot about in our lives. But I have friends who do 2 credits, and they put in their 12 hours a week kind of as extra hands for a graduate student, engaged on some level, but not, they maybe aren't interested in taking like the level of independence to be trying to be like a grad student. There's definitely value in still just being exposed to the laboratory science. If it's not your passion, you can definitely still contribute. But I think ideally you would kind of fall in love with it and want to contribute. Like Charles said, as much time as we can is pretty much going to go into research, just because it's something that we care about a lot.
Let's take another question.
Go ahead. Have you guys done like study abroad and research? Do you research while you're abroad?
So the question is it possible to do research while you're studying abroad? Any of you done research while abroad?
So I think I might be the only person here who have. So I studied abroad in Hong Kong at the Chinese University of Hong Kong for my entire junior year, which is kind of rare. so just because as a science major you have so many class requirements, but you can do it. And one of the reasons why I chose to go abroad for a year was the idea of being able to do research internationally. I had already known by that time in my career that you can't really get much done within a semester, especially if you're just being introduced to a new lab and a new project. And so when I was applying to programs, I looked at all of the ones that were available to me, and there were two that were offered for the full year, and one of them was Trinity College Dublin, and the other was in Hong Kong. And so I sent actually an email to the biology department of each of these universities, introducing myself, expressing my interest in doing research as an exchange student, as well as listing a number of professors whose labs I was interested in working with. And while the Trinity College Dublin never got back to me, the Chinese University of Hong Kong, they forwarded my email to the director of the School of Life Sciences, who also happened to be the #1 lab on my list. And he replied and basically said, if I got accepted into this exchange program, he'd be happy in taking me, and he has had international students previously work in this lab before. And so I actually used that as application material when I applied for my study abroad. And it worked out pretty well. I got accepted for the full year, and I think I was the first Notre Dame student to go to Hong Kong for the full year. I was also the first science student to go to Hong Kong. And I worked in a population genetics lab, marine science lab, doing population genetics of intertidal marine snail across East Asia. And it was really, really cool to be exposed to a different culture, and to be able to see not just the cultural differences, but also the similarities. We were using the same reagents, like the same pipettes, using the same kinds of language. Oh yeah, so there was an incident with the PCR machine. So in Hong Kong, I guess this could be among one of my, I guess, like biggest mistakes in my undergraduate career. So in Hong Kong, the climate is very, very hot and very, very humid, unlike Notre Dame, and also unlike Boston, where I've also had research experience. And so both here and at Notre Dame, one of the things you guys are familiar with PCR, right? Yeah. So one of the things we usually do after you run a PCR is you just leave it there at the last step, which is at 4 degrees, and it's just a refrigeration step to keep your DNA cool until you can come into the lab and take it out. And so sometimes we'll leave that overnight because we'd run PCR at the end of the day, and we don't want to have to come back at like 9 p.m. or whatever. And so I thought that was the case in Hong Kong as well, and I just assumed that without asking the graduate student who was supervising my research, or anyone else in the lab for that matter, which was a pretty big mistake on my part. And so the next day I come into the lab, and apparently the postdoc in the lab had gotten mad at the graduate student who was supervising my research for failing to tell me that I wasn't supposed to do that, because in Hong Kong, if you do that, it's likely that the machine will flood because it's so humid, and it'll damage the machine. And so I guess that's a lesson in knowing cultural differences, making sure you know what you're doing, asking questions, don't assume things just because you've done research before. But yeah, anyway, so I've done research abroad, and it is possible. It's also possible to do research abroad with just a semester as well. And I know a lot of people do that in Australia, which is a pretty popular option for the biology majors. I think it's at the University of Western Australia in Perth. And the other options for study abroad are obviously London. And in Asia, I know there's 2 new options. So I went to the Chinese University of Hong Kong. There's also a new option that's started last year at the University of Hong Kong, which is the other university in Hong Kong. And also another option opened this year at the National University of Singapore. And that program is actually directed towards engineering and science students, so it might be worth checking out.
The London option I know also has the London Public School of Health. So if you're interested in public health and you want to study abroad in London, I know an undergrad right now who's there doing that at this very instant. So I think if it's an interest of yours, you could probably pursue it, as Charles said, just about anywhere.
Yeah, and so, so just finishing, after my research was over, I actually presented my work at the Evolution Conference, which was held in Utah this summer. And that was awesome. I got to reconnect with a bunch of people I met the first time I went. And also, the graduate student who mentored me basically told me that once they have all the data and analyzed, and the paper is about to be published, they'll send it to me and add me as a co-author on the paper. So it is possible to do significant research when you're abroad, even though it could be a little difficult to juggle with things like going to classes and also, being abroad and trying to experience yourself, like doing travel and stuff like that.
Yeah. I went to Spain for my study abroad spring of junior year, so no science classes, no research. I really wanted to have that time to focus on like improving my language skills. And so I planned ahead for that in terms of classwork, in terms of deciding to take a gap year because I wouldn't be taking the MCAT spring of junior year. So I planned ahead and had that time where I had a semester without science classes and without research, and it worked fine. I was doing research leading up to my time when I left, and then went straight into an internship in the summer right after I got back from studying abroad. So that was good because then I was able to kind of fully engage in like the Spanish culture and practicing my language skills. And at the same time, the disengagement from science was a good opportunity to reflect too on my experiences thus far, because I really missed the science and I missed the research. So I was really excited to get back to New York the summer after to get back into it. And definitely when I got back into it, I was like, I really missed this. So that was reassuring of my interest in it.
And one more note, I was in London fall of junior year, and just to sort of add to that, definitely communicate with your mentors, because I know when I joined a little bit late, spring of my sophomore year, and I knew that I'd be writing a thesis for Glenn, and so I sat down with Rebecca and I was like, hey, I was accepted to study abroad in London, how do you feel about this? Because it was fall of my sophomore year, so it would have been like the second semester I was in lab during the year. And she's like, she was really cool, she's really flexible. She's like, that's totally fine, but how do you feel about spending both of your remaining summers in lab? I was like, yeah, sure, I'd love that. So that's sort of how I worked that out, but just make sure you're communicating and planning.
Yeah, I did 2 summers in the lab too, so I think that's probably a good point about that does kind of make it up to, because the lab invests in training you, so there's definitely a balance there between, it's not an explicit obligation that you have to the lab. Definitely you get to go abroad one time in your life, so like do that, but it's something to consider.
Take another question. It's going to be the last one, so don't be shy.
Are there any videos on the College of Science YouTube channel addressing undergraduate research?
I don't know if there's one on the College of Science YouTube channel, but the business school hosted the SPARK conference last spring on Notre Dame's research, entrepreneurship, and commercialization. And I was one of the speakers for that. I gave a talk, along the business theme. It was like going global health, research at the host parasite interface. And so that's on YouTube now on their the SPARK YouTube channel, I guess. But I spoke on a lot of the same things that I talked about tonight, and more generally about other things that you can get involved in the College of Science. So I will just say that our Dean Crawford, he is really great about talking to students and empowering student ideas. If you have a new thing or a new class that you want to start up here at Notre Dame, just schedule a meeting with him, and he loves talking to students. And as long as you're willing to take ownership of something or be the lead on a project, I'm saying this on film, but he will likely find a way to fund it. So if he thinks it's a good idea. And that's something new. I was talking to an alum last night actually who was here and worked with the dean who we had before, and she said it was night and day when Dean Crawford took over that he really engaged students. So I would encourage all of you, I know you're technically in the first year of studies right now, but if you stay a science major, which I'm assuming you all will, once you become a part of the College of Science, even now as freshmen as a science major, you're kind of a part of the College of Science, to just drop by and introduce yourself to the dean. Or whenever I walk into that office, I always walk out with some new piece of College of Science clothing or water bottle or also some new idea or some hint of like what's going on with the College of Science, but engaging in the global scientific community. So I would encourage all of you through your research or through the College of Science to don't be afraid to come up with a new project or a new idea. There are mechanisms here that you can pursue that. So.
Last question for each of our panelists, and we'll start with Kristin and work this way. What would you tell yourself in hindsight if you could go back and give advice to yourself when you were in your first semester freshman biology course?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is like just the idea of like going for it. I mean, I'm sure you guys have realized by now that Notre Dame really opens the doors for like a million different opportunities here on campus, and it's just really up to you to take advantage of it. So I think I would have told myself to not be intimidated by research and to get into it sooner. And you know, now as a senior, I'm like, it's crunch time. Like there's so much that I want to do, but I only have, you know, 1.5 semesters left, and that's really scary. So I probably would have told myself to just go for it. Take advantage of all that you can while you're here. Don't be afraid to just go after different things, whether it's contacting Dean Crawford with a new idea or contacting a professor whose work you're really interested in, even though you're a first semester freshman, you know?
I would say my number one thing that I would like to have done better or tell myself would be to read more. So maybe read textbooks a little bit better, because I've learned now that if you actually do read the textbook before class, like professors tell you, you actually pick up a lot more in lecture. So it took a while to learn that. But then kind of applied to lab, taking ownership of your project. A huge part of that is like taking the time to read the literature, digest the literature. Like that's something that Rachel has done very well. Like she explained, and I learned a lot from her later about that really contributing to your ability to engage in the scientific community on like a high level.
Yeah, I actually was thinking about this question before, and Kristin, you really hit the nail on the head. I was going to pose a question to you guys. Think about, like, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Like, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And I encourage all of you to, like, think about that question as you leave tonight. It doesn't have to be something in the Department of Biological Sciences or in the College of Science or even at Notre Dame. What would you do if you weren't afraid? And, like, my example, I guess, the two things that I hate doing the most are asking people for help and asking people for money. But really, as a scientist, those are like two essential skills, like forming collaborations with other scientists, asking for help from other people in the lab if you don't know what you're doing. Asking for money, I intend to go into academia. My life will be grant writing, so asking people for money for a living. So I told the story already about like managing your mentor and being able to ask questions of the person that you're working with. For me, asking for regular meetings with Mary Ann was a huge step for that. Also, spring of sophomore year, I started working in the phone center. So multiple times a shift, multiple times a week, I like have to ask alums for money on behalf of Notre Dame. And that was a really great experience to build some of that confidence and those skills to ask for what I want and be clear. And that's like a skill that I'm still working on. But so spring of sophomore year, that happened. Fast forward a couple months to like April of our sophomore year. Notre Dame has like a team of federal relations consultants, and one of them was in town for a talk. She talked about how not to get a grant through the National Science Foundation. I'm not sure why exactly I went. It wasn't really applicable to like me at the time, but what I left with was this notion that like, well, I'm a science student and want to go into the scientific community and like write grants, and I mean I think I want to write grants. I don't know if I'll like feel the same in 10 years, but I had very little understanding of how science or money for science is distributed to scientists and why the government even funds science. And so Roger and I talked a lot that summer about this topic and the Notre Dame science dialogue with Washington. And it actually turned into a new course on science policy. And what I didn't realize at the time, sitting in that how not to get an NSF grant talk, was that asking people for help and asking people for money and thinking about science policy would like really define the better part of my junior year. And it's amazing what people will do to help you if you just ask. And I think the biggest step is just asking in the first place. I mean, my life was like emails junior year, just reaching out to faculty here at Notre Dame, people in Washington, D.C., asking, oh, can our class meet with you when we're there for spring break? Or what's your opinion on this? Can you look at the syllabus? Like, what do you think? What do you wish you knew as a science student when you were thinking about going into science? Or how did you get into science policy as a career? And it was overwhelming, the responses that I was getting from people that were so happy to talk with students and were so helpful. The College of Science funded the class. We collaborated with the Center for Social Concerns, the Riley Center, the Notre Dame Office of Research, and that whole experience, I think, really embodied the being able to ask for help. And asking for help and asking for money are two things that I'm still working on. But making the decision, I think, when you're where you are now as freshmen, to constantly try to be better is something that I can't stress enough. So I'll ask again, what could you do? What would you accomplish if you weren't afraid?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with these guys have said. I also think taking advantage of your professors is a really crucial part of your life here. Notre Dame has such great faculty. And the only reason I ended up in research, I was unsure whether this was really something I wanted to do. I just talked to my professor, and she was so nice and welcoming about it. And the second thing would be, just do it. If you even have an inkling, just try it. There's nothing really to lose.
So I guess my advice would be to just relax. Just because you don't get an A in general biology as a freshman doesn't mean you won't get a job and you have to spend the rest of your life living with your parents. I know you guys are all overachievers. That's why you're sitting there. We're all overachievers. That's why we're sitting here.
You speak for yourself. I've gotten C's here, and I'm perfectly fine with that.
Exactly. You should be fine with a C. And I think, coming straight from high school, you kind of have a really, really high expectation of yourself. But you're in college, and the standards are different. Give yourself some breathing room. Do something else. Take a chance at research. You've never tried it before. Sure, it'll take some of your time, but you don't know what you'll get out of it.
Can I just say, I'm just going to reiterate what you just said, because that's perfect. I remember sitting where you guys are, and I remember being so high-strung and stressed. Gen Bio is rough. It's rough. We've been there. And I know, hopefully you take this to heart. Really take a deep breath and realize that 10 years from now, that Gen Chem exam or that Gen Bio exam is not going to matter. And definitely take a step back and try to put things in perspective and realize that this is just a small piece of this gigantic puzzle that is, Notre Dame and your experience here. I realize that's difficult, but hopefully you guys will try it.
Great. Let's give all of our panelists thank you for spending their evening with us. And if you guys have any additional questions, we're going to end the official Q&A session now, but I'm sure that some of our panelists will be more than happy to stick around if you have questions that you weren't comfortable with asking in front of the group. Thank you very much.